The summer sun shone brightly over Honolulu, casting long shadows across the playground where a young boy sat, lost in thought. His curly hair ruffled in the ocean breeze as he watched the waves crash against the shore. Barack Hussein Obama, a name that would one day echo through history, was just a child with big dreams. Barack had always been different. With a Kenyan father and a mother from Kansas, he often felt like he belonged to two worlds but was fully embraced by neither. His grandfather told him stories of struggle and perseverance, tales of warriors and leaders who shaped the world through their vision and courage. It was from these stories that Barack drew his first lessons in leadership. His mother, Ann Dunham, was his guiding light. She taught him the value of education, resilience, and kindness. "If you want to change the world, Barry," she often told him, "you must first understand it." And so, young Barack immersed himself in books, filling his mind with the wisdom of leaders, the struggles of civil rights activists, and the dreams of great thinkers. Even as a child, he noticed injustice. He saw the way people were treated differently because of their skin color, the opportunities denied to some while others flourished. It troubled him, but it also fueled a quiet determination inside him, one he did not yet fully understand but would carry for the rest of his life. At school, Barack was bright and curious, though sometimes he felt out of place. He struggled with questions about his identity and where he truly belonged. Was he African? Was he American? Or was he something in between? His search for meaning led him to explore different cultures, beliefs, and perspectives. But it wasn't just books and lessons that shaped young Barack. His grandfather, Gramps, shared stories of his time in World War II, teaching him about duty and sacrifice. His grandmother, Toot, worked tirelessly at a bank, showing him the power of hard work and persistence. Life was not always easy. When his father left, Barack felt a void, one that no amount of letters or rare visits could fill. But instead of bitterness, he nurtured curiosity. He wanted to understand his father's homeland, Kenya, and the people from whom he had inherited his name. As he grew, so did his desire to make a difference. Whether it was helping classmates with their homework, standing up for those who were bullied, or simply listening when someone needed a friend, Barack learned that leadership was not about power, it was about service. Little did he know that the lessons he was learning in his childhood would one day prepare him for the highest office in the land. The streets of Jakarta were alive with energy, motorcycles weaving through traffic, street vendors calling out their daily specials, and children playing in the narrow alleyways. Barack Obama, now 6 years old, walked through the bustling market with his mother and his stepfather, Lolo Sitoro. The sense of grilled sauté and fresh spices filled the air, blending with the rhythmic sounds of a city in motion. Jakarta was a world away from Hawaii. The roads were dusty, the language unfamiliar, and the customs different from what he had known. But Barack was adaptable. He learned to speak Indonesian, played soccer with local children, and even kept a pet monkey named Tata. Yet, despite embracing his new surroundings, a part of him always felt like an outsider. At night, under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, and made sure Barack continued his studies. "No matter where you are, Barry," she told him, "education will always be your greatest weapon." She woke him up before dawn to study English lessons and history, determined that he would one day return to the United States prepared for a brighter future. Barack's time in Indonesia exposed him to both beauty and hardship. He saw people struggling to make ends meet, children begging in the streets, and families living in extreme poverty. The inequalities around him stirred something deep inside. Even as a child, he questioned why some had so much while others had so little. His stepfather, Lolo, was a pragmatic man. He believed in survival, in doing whatever was necessary to get ahead. "The world is not always fair, Barry," he said one evening as they sat on the porch. "You have to be strong if you want to succeed." Barack listened, but his heart held a different belief. Strength, he felt, wasn't just about power, it was about lifting others up, about fighting for what was right. Return to Hawaii. After 4 years in Indonesia, Barack returned to Hawaii to live with his grandparents, Gramps and Toot. His mother, unable to bear being apart from him, would visit whenever she could. Though he loved his family, the transition back to American life wasn't easy. At school, he was one of the few black students. He sometimes felt isolated, caught between different worlds, too white for some, too black for others. He longed for a sense of belonging, but where was home? Was it Hawaii? Indonesia? Kenya? The land of his father? Or was it somewhere he had yet to find? Books became his refuge. He devoured works by writers like James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, and W.E.B. Du Bois. Through their words, he found echoes of his own struggles, reflections of his search for identity. He also became fascinated by American history, particularly the stories of Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr., men who had fought for justice and equality. High school brought new challenges. Barack was bright, but sometimes rebellious. He struggled with questions that many teenagers did. Who am I? What do I stand for? He experimented, made mistakes, and, at times, felt lost. But one thing remained clear: he wanted to make a difference. Basketball became his passion, an escape where race and background didn't matter. On the court, all that counted was skill and determination. The game taught him discipline, teamwork, and perseverance, qualities that would serve him well in the years ahead. A letter from Kenya. One day, a letter arrived from Africa. It was from his half-sister, Alma Obama, writing from Kenya. She spoke of their father, of the struggles their family faced, and of a homeland Barack barely knew. Reading her words, he felt a deep longing. His father, the man he barely remembered, was a mystery to him. Barack had grown up with stories about his brilliance, a scholar, a visionary. But why had he left? Why had he never been a part of his son's life? The letter sparked a desire in Barack to learn more about his roots. He realized that understanding his past was essential to shaping his future. As his high school graduation approached, he faced a crossroads. He could take the easy path, settle into a comfortable life, stay in Hawaii, play basketball, and coast through the years. But deep inside, he knew he was meant for something greater. One day, standing by the ocean, he made a silent vow to himself. He would find his purpose. He would not just exist, he would make an impact. And so, with that promise in his heart, he prepared to take the next step in his journey, a journey that would lead him to new cities, new challenges, and ultimately, to the highest office in the land. The city of Los Angeles stretched endlessly below as the airplane descended. Barack Obama, now a young man of 18, looked out the window at the sprawling metropolis that marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He was on his way to Occidental College, a small liberal arts school in California, and though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: he was no longer a boy searching for identity. He was stepping into the world, ready to shape it. A taste of freedom. College life was exhilarating. For the first time, Barack was independent, away from the familiar streets of Honolulu and the watchful eyes of his grandparents. He made friends quickly, people from different backgrounds, races, and ideologies. Discussions in dorm rooms stretched late into the night, covering politics, history, and the injustices they saw in the world. Barack was drawn to activism. He read passionately about civil rights, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and the lingering effects of racism in America. He attended protests, debated in classrooms, and slowly began to see that change wasn't something that just happened. It was something people fought for. Still, he sometimes felt like an outsider. Though he had a diverse group of friends, he often wondered, where do I truly belong? Was he destined to be a scholar? An activist? A leader? But self-doubt didn't stop him from pushing forward. The transfer to Columbia. After 2 years at Occidental, Barack made a bold decision. He transferred to Columbia University in New York City. If he wanted to understand the world, he needed to be at its center, and New York was just that. The city was alive with energy, crowded subways, honking taxis, towering skyscrapers. Here, he saw both immense wealth and deep poverty, sometimes on the same street. The inequalities he had sensed as a child in Indonesia and later in Hawaii were even more glaring in the city. He rented a small apartment in Harlem, immersing himself in books and thought. Philosophy, history, political science. He devoured them all. He was searching for answers, Not just about society, but about himself. He walked the streets alone, thinking about his father, about the family he barely knew in Kenya, about what it meant to be black in America. He wrestled with questions of race and identity, knowing that to truly make a difference, he first had to understand the system he hoped to change. The lost letter. One evening, as he sorted through old papers, he found a letter from his father, one he had never answered. It was brief, filled with formal words of encouragement. His father had written about his career, his beliefs, and a distant hope that they might see each other again. But that meeting would never happen. A few months earlier, Barack had received news from Kenya. His father had died in a car accident. He was gone. Just like that, the man he had spent years wondering about, searching for in books and memories, was lost forever. Barack sat quietly, holding the letter in his hands. It was too late to ask questions, too late to bridge the gap between them. But in that moment of loss, he made a decision. His father's story would not define him. He would define himself. Finding his voice. Determined to turn pain into purpose, Barack threw himself into his studies. He was drawn to the lives of great leaders, Lincoln, King, Gandhi. What made them different? What made them unforgettable? It wasn't just their words, it was their actions. It was around this time that he came across a single word that would guide him for years to come. Hope. Hope was what had driven people to fight for civil rights. Hope was what gave struggling families the strength to keep going. And hope was what had brought his own mother, and, from Kansas to Indonesia, believing in a better life for her son. It was also hope that Barack now carried within himself, the hope that he could make a difference, even if he wasn't sure how yet. A decision that changed everything. As graduation neared, many of Barack's classmates were planning careers in law, business, or finance. Some dreamed of wealth and power. But Barack wanted something else. One night, he sat with a professor who had taken an interest in him. "You have potential, Barack," the professor said. "You could go anywhere, Wall Street, Washington. What do you want to do?" Barack thought for a long moment before answering. "I want to work where people need help the most." The professor nodded. "Then go to where the struggle is. Learn from the people. Then, maybe you'll know what kind of leader you're meant to be." And so, Barack made a life-changing decision. Instead of chasing money or prestige, he would go to Chicago, a city rich in history, a place where he could work at the ground level, among real people facing real problems. He didn't know it then, but this choice, this leap of faith, would set him on the path toward history. The winter wind howled through the streets of Chicago, biting at Barack Obama's face as he stepped off the bus. The city was nothing like the warm beaches of Hawaii or the busy markets of Indonesia. Here, the sky was gray, the buildings stretched endlessly toward the clouds, and the air carried the scent of steel, asphalt, and struggle. Barack pulled his coat tighter around himself and adjusted his bag over his shoulder. This was where he had chosen to be, not in a Wall Street office or a comfortable academic setting, but in the heart of a city known for its labor movements, racial tensions, and economic hardships. If he wanted to understand the real America, he had to start here. He had taken a job as a community organizer with the Developing Communities Project, a small nonprofit working on the south side of Chicago. The neighborhoods were filled with people who had been left behind by economic change. Steel mills had shut down, jobs had disappeared, and hope was fading. Barack didn't come with money or power. He had no connections, no great name to rely on. All he had was a willingness to listen and a determination to help. But the people of Chicago were skeptical. "Proving himself. Another outsider with big ideas," muttered one older man as Barack walked into a small community meeting at a local church. Barack smiled and took a seat among the residents. They were mostly African-American, working-class people who had seen politicians and activists come and go, promising change, but delivering little. An elderly woman, Miss Thompson, looked him up and down. "Son, what do you know about our struggles?" It was a fair question. He wasn't born in Chicago. He hadn't lived through segregation. He wasn't the child of steelworkers or factory employees. "I don't know everything," Barack admitted. "But I'm here to learn. And to help, if you'll let me." The room was silent for a moment. Then a man in the back, wearing a faded Union jacket, spoke. "All right then, young man. Let's see what you can do." The power of organizing. Barack spent his days walking the streets, visiting homes, and listening to people's stories. He met single mothers struggling to feed their kids, workers laid off with nowhere to go, young men tempted by the streets because there were no jobs to keep them on the right path. At first, people were hesitant. But slowly, as he kept showing up, at churches, in living rooms, at community events, they began to trust him. His first big challenge came when he helped organize a campaign to pressure city officials to remove asbestos from the South Side's aging housing projects. It was a small fight compared to the larger struggles of racism and poverty, but to the families breathing in toxic dust every day, it was everything. Barack and his team knocked on doors, gathered signatures, and called City Hall again and again. "It won't work," Miss Thompson told him one evening after a long community meeting. "They've ignored us for years." "Then we'll keep pushing until they can't ignore us anymore," Barack replied. And they did. After months of pressure, officials finally agreed to begin removing the asbestos. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was proof that change was possible, even in a system designed to keep people down. The lessons of the South Side. Barack learned that change didn't come from speeches or slogans. It came from organizing people, building coalitions, and never giving up. He also learned that politics wasn't just about elections, it was about the everyday struggles of people who needed help, but had been forgotten. But the work was exhausting. Many nights, he came home to his small apartment feeling defeated. Would this ever be enough? Could one man truly make a difference? One evening, after a long day, he visited a church where a group of workers were meeting. They had just lost their jobs and were discussing their next steps. As Barack listened, one of them stood up and said, "We've been knocked down before, but we're still here. We keep going. That's what we do." Something about those words stayed with him. He realized that hope wasn't just a dream, it was a choice. A decision to keep fighting, even when the odds were against you. A new path. After 3 years of community organizing, Barack knew he had to take the next step. He had learned how to bring people together, how to listen, and how to fight for change. But he also realized that to make a bigger impact, he needed to understand the law, the rules that govern society. If he wanted to help struggling communities on a larger scale, he needed the tools to challenge the system itself. And so, after much thought, he applied to Harvard Law School. Some of his friends in Chicago were surprised. "You're leaving us for the Ivy League," one man joked. Barack laughed. "I'll be back. But I need to learn more so I can do more." It was a tough decision, but he knew it was the right one. He wasn't abandoning the people he had fought for. He was preparing to fight for them on a greater level. As he packed his bags for Cambridge, Massachusetts, he looked back at the city that had shaped him. Chicago had taught him that leadership wasn't about standing above people, it was about standing with them. And now, he was ready for the next battle. The air in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was crisp as Barack Obama stepped onto the historic grounds of Harvard Law School. The towering buildings, the endless bookshelves in the library, and the intense discussions in lecture halls were a stark contrast to the streets of Chicago. Here, the future leaders of America sharpened their minds, debated ideas, and prepared for lives of influence. Barack wasn't the typical Harvard student. While many of his classmates came from wealthy families or prestigious backgrounds, he arrived carrying the lessons of the South Side of Chicago. He had seen what it meant to struggle. He had walked through neighborhoods where hope was fading. And he knew that law wasn't just about rules, it was about justice. But even at Harvard, he still felt like an outsider at times. Finding his voice. Harvard Law was challenging, but Barack thrived in the intense academic environment. He quickly gained a reputation as a sharp thinker and a powerful speaker. His ability to connect ideas with real-world struggles set him apart. One day, during a heated debate in class, a professor posed a question about the balance between law and morality. Barack listened carefully, then spoke. "The law isn't just words on paper," he said. "It shapes the way people live. And when the law fails people, when it denies them opportunity, when it allows injustice to continue, it's our job to change it." The room fell silent for a moment. Even those who disagreed with him nodded in respect. It was here that Barack began to understand the power of words, not just to argue, but to inspire. The first Black president of the Harvard Law Review. Harvard Law Review was one of the most prestigious legal publications in the country. Becoming its president was an honor reserved for the best and brightest minds at Harvard. It was also an intensely competitive position, one that had never been held by a Black student in the law school's history. Barack, with his natural leadership and ability to bring people together, decided to run. His competitors were just as brilliant, but Barack had something else: the ability to listen, to unite, to make people believe in a common purpose. The election process was grueling. Candidates had to win the votes of their peers, who came from different backgrounds and political beliefs. Barack spent hours talking to fellow students, not just making a case for himself, but understanding their concerns, their perspectives. When the votes were finally counted, history was made. Barack Obama became the first Black president of the Harvard Law Review. The news spread beyond Harvard. Newspapers wrote about him, calling him a rising star. Suddenly, people were paying attention. Some even whispered that he could have a future in politics. But Barack wasn't thinking about power. He was thinking about responsibility, love, and destiny. It was during this time that Barack's life changed in another way. He met Michelle Robinson. She was a young, brilliant lawyer from Chicago, working at the law firm Sidley Austin. Barack had taken a summer internship there, and Michelle was assigned to mentor him. She was strong-willed, confident, and had deep roots in the South Side community. At first, Michelle wasn't interested in dating an intern. But Barack was persistent. He wasn't just smart. He had vision, ambition, and a belief in something greater than himself. On their first date, he took her to a community meeting instead of a fancy restaurant. Michelle saw how much he cared about the people, how deeply he believed in making a difference. Slowly, she began to see what so many others had already seen in him: a man who could change the world. A future in politics? By the time Barack graduated from Harvard, doors were opening everywhere. He could have taken a high-paying job at a major law firm, but he chose a different path. He returned to Chicago, to the place that had shaped him, and started working as a civil rights lawyer and a law professor. He helped people fight discrimination, represented those who had been silenced, and continued his mission of organizing communities. But something inside him was growing: an idea, a question, a possibility. Could he do more? Could he help not just one neighborhood at a time, but an entire city, a state, maybe even the country? People around him saw it before he did. Barack, one of his mentors, told him, "Have you ever thought about running for office?" He laughed. "Politics? That's not my world." His mentor smiled. "Maybe it should be." That night, Barack sat in his apartment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. He thought about his journey from Hawaii to Indonesia, from the streets of Chicago to Harvard Law, from being a community organizer to now having the chance to shape the system itself. And for the first time, he truly considered the possibility of stepping into the world of politics. He had spent his life searching for where he belonged. And now he had an answer. His place was with the people. His fight was for justice. And his future? It was just beginning. The South Side of Chicago was alive with energy as Barack Obama walked through its streets, shaking hands, listening to people's struggles, and sharing his vision for change. This time, he wasn't just a community organizer, he was a candidate. Running for public office was never part of Barack's original plan, but the more he worked in civil rights law and teaching constitutional law at the University of Chicago, the more he saw the limits of what he could do from the outside. Real change needed political power. And so, in 1996, Barack Obama made his first run for office, seeking a seat in the Illinois State Senate. But politics was a battlefield, and Barack was about to get his first taste of the fight. The brutal reality of politics. The race for the Illinois State Senate seat wasn't easy. Chicago politics was notorious for being tough, and Barack faced powerful opponents. Some doubted him. "He's too young," they whispered. "He's too idealistic." Others saw his mixed background as a weakness. "He's not really one of us," a few skeptics said. "He's not from here." But Barack didn't back down. He knew what he stood for: better schools, affordable healthcare, and economic opportunities for struggling families. Instead of engaging in political mudslinging, he focused on people. He went door to door, met with community leaders, and listened. He didn't just talk, he connected. And in the end, his persistence paid off. Barack Obama won the election, earning a seat in the Illinois State Senate, marking the first step in what would become an extraordinary political journey. Learning the system. As a state senator, Barack was eager to bring change, but he quickly learned that politics was filled with bureaucracy, opposition, and compromise. Not everyone wanted progress. At first, many dismissed him. He was a newcomer, an outsider with big ideas but no real power. But Barack had something they underestimated: patience, strategy, and an unshakable belief in his mission. He worked across party lines, gaining respect even from those who didn't always agree with him. He helped pass legislation that expanded healthcare for children, increased tax credits for working families, and reformed criminal justice policies. Slowly, he earned a reputation, not just as a politician but as a leader who could get things done. But Barack wasn't just growing in his career. His personal life was also transforming. A love that stood strong. Through all the challenges, Barack had one constant source of strength: Michelle. Their love had deepened, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a common vision for the future. But life wasn't always easy. Michelle had concerns. "Politics is rough, Barack," she said one evening after a long day. "It takes so much of your time. What about our family?" Barack understood. He loved Michelle deeply, and he didn't want politics to come between them. But Michelle also saw the fire in his eyes, the passion to help others, to create change. And as much as she worried about the sacrifices, she believed in him. In 1998, their first daughter, Malia and Obama, was born. A few years later, in 2001, they welcomed their second daughter, Natasha Sasha Obama. Fatherhood changed Barack. It made his mission even more personal. The world he wanted to build wasn't just for strangers. It was for his daughters, for their future. The speech that changed everything. By 2004, Barack had made a name for himself in Illinois. But what happened next would launch him onto the national stage. That year, he decided to run for the U.S. Senate. It was a bold move, but he believed the time was right. As part of his campaign, he was invited to give the keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention. This was his moment. The whole country would be watching. And when he stepped onto the stage, he delivered a speech that would define him for years to come. He spoke about hope, about unity, about the idea that America was not divided into red states and blue states, but a single nation, bound together by shared dreams. There's not a liberal America and a conservative America. There's the United States of America. The audience erupted in applause. People across the country who had never heard his name before were suddenly paying attention. When he walked off that stage, Barack Obama was no longer just a rising politician. He was a national figure. The road to Washington. Riding the momentum from his speech, Barack won his U.S. Senate race in a landslide victory, becoming only the third black senator in U.S. history. Now, he was stepping onto a bigger stage, one where the stakes were higher, the challenges greater, and the possibilities endless. As he walked into the U.S. Capitol for the first time as a United States Senator, he thought about his journey, from the beaches of Hawaii to the streets of Chicago, from community organizing to the national spotlight. And deep inside, a thought began to form, one that he hadn't dared to say out loud yet. Could he go even further? Could he one day lead the entire nation? He wasn't sure yet, but one thing was clear: his journey was far from over. The halls of the United States Senate were grand, lined with marble and history. As Senator Barack Obama walked through them for the first time in 2005, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had come a long way from the streets of Chicago, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. People were counting on him. Washington was a place of power, but it was also a place of deep divisions. Politics wasn't just about making laws, it was about battles between parties, interests, and ideologies. Barack understood this. But he also believed that America could be better. And as he worked on policies related to ethics reform, veterans' health care, and nuclear non-proliferation, another idea kept growing in his mind, an idea that would change history. The decision to run. By 2006, people across the country were talking about Barack Obama. His 2004 Democratic National Convention speech had made him a national figure, and now, everywhere he went, people asked him the same question. Are you going to run for president? At first, he hesitated. He was still new to the Senate. He had young daughters. The presidency was a huge responsibility. But as he traveled across America, he saw something undeniable. People wanted change. They were tired of division, corruption, and broken promises. They wanted hope. They wanted someone who believed in unity, not division. And so, on February 10, 2007, standing before a cheering crowd in Springfield, Illinois, Barack Obama announced his candidacy for President of the United States. His message was simple but powerful. Yes, we can. A historic campaign. The road to the White House was filled with challenges. Barack faced powerful opponents, including Hillary Clinton, a well-known and experienced politician. Many doubted him. America isn't ready for a black president, some critics whispered. He's too inexperienced, others said. But Barack had something stronger than doubt. He had people. Young voters, working-class Americans, and communities who had long felt unheard rallied behind him. His campaign used social media, grassroots organizing, and a message of hope and change to inspire millions. And then, in January 2008, something remarkable happened. Barack won the Iowa caucuses, shocking the political world. A black man with a message of unity had just won in a predominantly white state. From that moment, everything changed. Facing adversity. The campaign wasn't easy. Barack faced racist attacks, false rumors, and political opposition. Some tried to paint him as un-American, questioning his background and faith. Others doubted whether he could handle the pressure of leading the country. But he didn't let the negativity stop him. He responded with grace, intelligence, and resilience. When his former pastor's controversial statements threatened to derail his campaign, Barack didn't hide. He addressed the issue head-on with a historic speech about race in America, calling for understanding and unity. Slowly, more and more Americans started believing in his vision. Making history. In June 2008, Barack Obama won the Democratic nomination, defeating Hillary Clinton. It was historic. He was the first black nominee of a major political party. Then, in the general election, he faced John McCain, a respected war hero and longtime senator. The race was tough, and America was in crisis. The economy was collapsing, people were losing their homes, and the country was deeply divided. But Barack's message of hope resonated. He wasn't just offering policies, he was offering a new way forward. And on November 4, 2008, history was made. As the results came in, people across America cried, cheered, and celebrated. From the streets of Chicago to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the message was clear. Barack Obama had been elected the 44th President of the United States. He stepped onto the stage in Grant Park, Chicago, before a crowd of thousands and delivered words that would be remembered forever. If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, tonight is your answer. Tears streamed down faces. Parents held their children close, knowing they were witnessing history. Barack Obama had proven that hope could win. That change was possible, and that in America, anything was achievable. A new beginning. As Barack prepared to move into the White House, he knew that the real work was just beginning. The country was in crisis, and expectations were sky-high. He would face opposition, challenges, and moments of doubt. But standing beside him was Michelle, Malia, and Sasha. Standing behind him were millions of Americans who believed in his vision. He had made history. But now he had to lead. And as he looked out at the crowd that night, he whispered to himself the words that had carried him through his entire journey. Yes, we can.